Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, had always been an enigma to the public. While much of his family's life was under constant scrutiny, Barron had managed to stay somewhat in the shadows, shielded from the media's relentless gaze. But what transpired one cold winter afternoon would thrust him into the spotlight in a way that no one could have anticipated. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. It was a gray day in Washington, D.C., the kind of day when the chill seemed to seep into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. Barron, now a tall and lanky teenager, had decided to forego the family's usual motorcade to take a solo stroll. He had grown fond of walking through the city's quieter streets, relishing the anonymity that came from dressing in plain clothes and blending into the crowd. He wore a navy hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, hardly the attire of someone from a high-profile family. The Secret Service agents shadowed him at a respectable distance, understanding that the young Trump valued his space. As Barron turned down a less crowded street, his sharp eyes caught sight of a man sitting on the pavement, bundled in a tattered military coat. The man's face was weathered, marked by deep lines that told stories of hardship and survival. Beside him was a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless veteran, hungry, please help." A threadbare blanket was wrapped around his legs, and an empty coffee cup sat in front of him, rattling with a few coins as passers-by tossed in their spare change. For reasons Barron couldn't quite articulate, he stopped. Maybe it was the man's piercing blue eyes, which seemed out of place in a face so defeated. Maybe it was the way the world seemed to hurry past him, as if he were invisible. Whatever the reason, Barron found himself stepping closer. "Hi," Barron said, his voice gentle but firm. The man looked up, startled. People rarely stopped to speak to him, and certainly not someone as young and well-groomed as Barron. "Hi," the man replied cautiously, his voice gravelly from years of hardship. "What's your name?" Barron asked, crouching down to meet the man's gaze. "Jacob," the man answered after a moment of hesitation. "Jacob Willis." Barron extended a hand, and after a brief pause, Jacob shook it. His grip was strong, a remnant of his days in the military. "I'm Barron," he said simply, offering no last name. Jacob studied him for a moment, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, but he said nothing. Instead, he shrugged and gestured to his surroundings. "This is where I've been living," he said, his tone laced with both bitterness and resignation. "Not much to show for all those years serving my country." Barron felt a pang of guilt. He had lived a life of privilege, surrounded by opulence and opportunity. He couldn't imagine the series of events that had led Jacob to this point, but he wanted to understand. "What happened?" he asked. Jacob hesitated. Most people didn't care to hear his story. They dropped a coin or two and moved on. But something about this boy made him open up. He spoke of his time in the military, the camaraderie and purpose he'd felt. But after returning home, he found a world that had little use for him. Jobs were scarce, and the trauma he carried made it difficult to hold on to the few opportunities he found. Eventually, he lost everything. His home, his family, his dignity. As Jacob spoke, Barron listened intently, his expression serious. When Jacob finished, there was a moment of silence between them. Then Barron said, "You deserve better than this." Jacob chuckled bitterly. "Tell that to the government," he said. "They don't care about guys like me." Barron stood up abruptly, his tall frame towering over Jacob. "Wait here," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jacob watched as Barron walked briskly down the street, disappearing into a nearby cafe. He returned a few minutes later carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a bag of food, which he handed to Jacob. "Here," Barron said. "It's not much, but it's a start." Jacob accepted the items with a grateful nod. "Thanks, kid," he said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was the first warm drink he'd had in days. But Barron wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. When he finished, he made a call. Jacob couldn't hear the details, but he caught snippets. "Yes, I'm serious. And no, I don't care about the cost." When Barron hung up, he turned back to Jacob. "I've got someone coming to help you," he said. "You're not going to be out here much longer." Jacob stared at him, disbelief etched on his face. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Barron shrugged. "I don't need to know you to know this isn't right," he said simply. Within half an hour, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Two men stepped out, dressed in professional attire. They introduced themselves as representatives from a veterans organization that specialized in helping homeless service members reintegrate into society. They spoke to Jacob kindly, assuring him that they would provide him with temporary housing, job training, and mental health support. Jacob looked at Barron, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't have to," Barron replied. "Just promise me you'll give yourself a chance." As the SUV drove away with Jacob inside, Barron stood on the sidewalk. watching until it disappeared from view. One of the Secret Service agents approached him, a concerned look on his face. "You're going to make headlines for this," the agent said. Barron shrugged. "Let them talk," he said. "Maybe it'll get people to pay attention to guys like Jacob." And he was right. The story quickly went viral, with headlines praising Barron's compassion and initiative. Social media was flooded with posts lauding the teenager for his actions, calling him a role model for his generation. But for Barron, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about doing what was right. In the weeks that followed, Barron stayed in touch with Jacob, checking in on his progress, and even visiting him at the shelter where he was staying. True to his word, Jacob began to turn his life around. He found a part-time job and started attending therapy sessions to address his trauma. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild his life. Barron's actions sparked a broader conversation about the treatment of homeless veterans in America. Inspired by his example, several organizations reported an increase in donations and volunteers, all eager to help those who had served their country. Even members of Congress took notice, discussing potential legislation to address the systemic issues that led to homelessness among veterans. Through it all, Barron remained humble, deflecting praise and insisting that anyone in his position would have done the same. But those who knew him understood that it took a rare kind of person to see a problem and take immediate action, regardless of the consequences. Barron Trump returned home that evening with a sense of quiet fulfillment. Though he didn't speak of what had happened to anyone, he felt no need to broadcast his actions. His satisfaction came from knowing he had helped someone. But the story, as it often happens with acts of kindness, began to spread. The next morning, the media was ablaze with headlines. Paparazzi, often known for capturing trivial moments of celebrity life, had unknowingly documented Barron's interaction with Jacob. The images showed a tall teenager kneeling on the pavement, talking to a homeless man as if they were old friends, and later making a phone call with a determined expression. By the time Barron woke up, his name was trending across social media platforms, and news outlets were clamoring for statements from the Trump family. Melania Trump was the first to hear of it. Seated at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, she came across an article titled, "Barron Trump's Heartwarming Gesture Toward Homeless Veteran Captured on Camera." She set her coffee cup down, her lips curving into a rare, proud smile. She called Barron into the room, holding up the article. "What's this?" she asked. Though her tone was far from accusatory, Barron's face flushed. He hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone his family. "It was nothing," he said, brushing off the attention. "Nothing?" Melania's voice softened as she glanced back at the screen. "You've made people see something important. That's far from nothing." Donald Trump, ever the figure of divisiveness in the public eye, was surprisingly moved when he learned of the incident. Though his usual demeanor leaned toward bluster and bravado, he couldn't hide his pride in his youngest son. "Good instincts," he said to Barron later that day. "Helping a veteran like that, people notice. And more importantly, it's the right thing to do." But Barron wasn't interested in praise or political capital. His focus remained on Jacob and the veterans like him. Over the following weeks, he became involved in more direct efforts to aid homeless veterans. While most teenagers his age spent their evenings gaming or scrolling social media, Barron found himself immersed in learning about homelessness, PTSD, and the gaps in the support system for veterans. He spoke to experts, visited shelters, and even volunteered at soup kitchens. His tall figure an incongruous but welcome presence among the volunteers. The story of Barron's initial encounter with Jacob continued to ripple outward, sparking a wave of activism. Across the country, people began stepping up to help veterans in their communities. Stories poured in of strangers paying for hotel rooms for homeless veterans, of landlords offering discounted apartments, and of businesses creating job programs specifically for those who had served. A movement was quietly taking shape, and Barron's simple act of compassion was at its heart. One day, about a month after their first meeting, Barron visited Jacob at the transitional housing center where he was staying. Jacob looked like a different man. His beard was neatly trimmed, his posture straighter, and there was a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He greeted Barron with a firm handshake and a smile. "You clean up well," Barron joked, earning a chuckle from Jacob. "Thanks to you," Jacob replied. "You didn't just give me a second chance, you gave me hope." Barron waved off the compliment, but Jacob wasn't finished. "I want to do something," he said, "to give back. There are so many guys out there like me who are still struggling. I want to help them." Together, the two began brainstorming ways to make an impact. Jacob suggested starting a peer mentorship program for veterans, where those who had successfully transitioned out of homelessness could guide others through the process. Barron loved the idea, and offered to help get it off the ground. With Barron's connections and Jacob's first-hand experience, the project quickly gained momentum. They called it Pathways Forward and launched it as a pilot program in Washington, D.C. The idea was simple but powerful: veterans helping veterans. Within weeks, the program was inundated with applications from veterans who wanted to serve as mentors and those seeking guidance. Barron threw himself into the project with an intensity that surprised even him. He attended meetings, reviewed proposals, and spoke at fundraisers. Despite his youth, his passion and sincerity won over even the most skeptical audiences. Jacob, meanwhile, became the face of the program, sharing his story to inspire others. The media continued to follow Barron's journey, but he remained steadfast in keeping the focus on the cause rather than himself. In interviews, he redirected questions about his own life to highlight the stories of the veterans Pathways Forward was helping. His humility only endeared him further to the public, and donations to the program poured in from all over the world. One of the most poignant moments came during a televised town hall event where Barron and Jacob sat side by side, answering questions from the audience. A young woman stood up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "My dad was a veteran," she said. "He struggled with PTSD and ended up homeless for a while. I just want to thank you for what you're doing. It means more than you'll ever know." Barron's eyes glistened as he listened. "It's people like your dad who remind me why we started this," he said. "No one who serves their country should ever feel abandoned." The town hall became a turning point. Inspired by the public's overwhelming support, Barron and Jacob decided to expand Pathways Forward beyond Washington, D.C. They partnered with local organizations in cities across the country, creating a network of support for veterans. Each new branch of the program brought its own challenges, but Barron tackled them with the same determination he had shown that first day on the street. As the program grew, so did Barron's understanding of the complexities of homelessness among veterans. He learned about the systemic issues that contributed to the problem, from a lack of affordable housing to the stigma surrounding mental health care. He began advocating for policy changes, using his platform to push for increased funding for veteran services and better coordination between government agencies. In one particularly memorable speech, delivered to a packed audience at a veterans advocacy conference, Barron said, "This isn't about charity, it's about justice. These men and women gave everything for their country. It's our responsibility to make sure they're not forgotten." The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and his words echoed in headlines the next day. But Barron didn't let the accolades distract him from his work. He continued to visit shelters, speak with veterans, and brainstorm new ways to make a difference. Jacob, too, found a renewed sense of purpose through his work with Pathways Forward. He became a tireless advocate for veterans, speaking at events and mentoring countless individuals who were in the same position he had once been. The bond between him and Barron grew stronger, forged by their shared commitment to the cause. As the months turned into years, Barron's involvement with Pathways Forward became a defining chapter of his life. Though he was still a teenager, he carried himself with a maturity that belied his age. His work inspired countless others to step up and make a difference, proving that even small acts of kindness could spark monumental change. Jacob often reflected on the moment that had brought them together. He never could have imagined that a chance encounter on a cold sidewalk would lead to such profound transformation, not just for him but for so many others. And yet, that was the beauty of it. A reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person stopping to care. Barron, for his part, never stopped caring. Though his life remained full of other responsibilities and opportunities, he continued to prioritize his work with Pathways Forward. He knew that there were still so many Jacobs out there, waiting for someone to see them, to listen, and to help. And so, with each step he took, Barron carried forward the lesson he had learned that winter afternoon, that kindness, when paired with action, has the power to change the world. The expansion of Pathways Forward began to take on a life of its own, becoming a sprawling network of support and opportunity for veterans nationwide. Each new branch came with its own unique challenges, shaped by the specific needs of the local community. In Chicago, where winters were harsh and the homeless population particularly vulnerable, the focus shifted toward emergency housing and weather preparedness. In Los Angeles, where the warm climate drew a larger homeless population, the emphasis was on long-term affordable housing and substance abuse recovery programs. Each city's challenges required tailored solutions, and Barron Trump found himself at the heart of it all. Despite his young age, Barron began attending conferences on urban development and homelessness solutions. He was no longer just a figurehead or a teenager with a good heart. He was becoming a voice in the larger conversation about systemic change. What surprised everyone around him was how seriously experts took his involvement. While he lacked formal training or years of experience, Barron brought a genuine passion and the ability to connect disparate groups, government officials, nonprofits, and private companies, in a way that felt authentic. One such connection happened during a meeting with a Fortune 500 CEO who had expressed interest in supporting Pathways Forward, but was hesitant about the organization's scalability. Barron, sitting across from the sharply dressed executive, leaned forward and laid out his vision, a nationwide network that didn't just help veterans find housing and jobs, but also created a pipeline for reintegration into society through mentorship and community involvement. "We're not just addressing homelessness," Barron explained, his tone calm but resolute. "We're building pathways for dignity and self-worth. That's what makes the program work. It's not charity, it's empowerment." The CEO, impressed by Barron's clarity and conviction, pledged not only financial support, but also the resources of his company to develop job training programs tailored to veterans. This partnership became a cornerstone of Pathways Forward's next phase: economic independence for those it served. As the organization grew, so did its reach. Barron and Jacob were invited to visit veterans organizations in rural areas, where the challenges were different, but no less urgent. Many rural veterans faced isolation and limited access to healthcare, making their struggles less visible but just as dire. On one trip to a small town in West Virginia, Barron met an older veteran named Clarence who had been living alone in a decrepit cabin for years. Clarence had been a medic in the Vietnam War, and though he was fiercely independent, his age and declining health made his situation increasingly precarious. Pathways Forward stepped in, connecting Clarence with resources for healthcare and home repairs, but it was the personal connection that made the biggest difference. Barron sat with Clarence for hours, listening to his stories and learning about the sacrifices he had made. It was during these moments that Barron realized the emotional toll of service was just as important to address as the physical or economic hardships. These encounters deepened Barron's understanding of the complexities of veteran homelessness. He began advocating for more comprehensive mental health support as part of the program's offerings. Through collaborations with leading psychologists and veterans groups, Pathways Forward introduced a groundbreaking peer counseling initiative. Veterans could speak with trained peers who understood their experiences firsthand, creating a bridge of trust that traditional therapy often struggled to achieve. The media attention around Barron's work continued to grow, but he remained remarkably grounded. He had no desire to turn his efforts into a spectacle or to capitalize on his last name. Instead, he used the attention to shine a light on the systemic issues that led to homelessness among veterans. When asked by a prominent journalist how he stayed so focused despite the pressure, Barron replied, "Because this isn't about me, it's about them. It always has been." One of the most transformative moments for Pathways Forward came during a Senate hearing on veteran affairs. Barron, accompanied by Jacob and several other veterans who had benefited from the program, testified about the urgent need for legislative reform. Barron's testimony was powerful, not because of his family name, but because of the stories he shared. He spoke of Jacob's initial struggles, of Clarence's isolation, and of countless others who had found hope through the program. His words were clear, emotional, and unflinching. "We're failing the people who gave everything for this country," Barron said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's not enough to thank them for their service. We need to prove it with our actions." The hearing led to bipartisan support for a sweeping Veterans Assistance Bill, which increased funding for housing programs, expanded access to mental health services, and created new job training initiatives. Though Barron's involvement was instrumental, he refused to take credit, instead praising the collective effort of everyone involved. Outside the political sphere, Barron's work began to inspire a cultural shift. Schools started integrating lessons about veterans into their curricula, emphasizing empathy and understanding. Companies began rethinking their hiring practices, creating more opportunities for veterans. Communities organized events to support local veterans, from job fairs to neighborhood cleanup days led by former service members. Through it all, Barron continued to visit shelters and transitional housing centers, often without fanfare or media coverage. He believed in staying connected to the people he was helping, understanding their needs and challenges on a personal level. It was during one such visit that he met Maria, a former Army engineer who had lost her home after a series of personal tragedies. Maria had been skeptical of Pathways Forward at first, but with the program's help, she found stable housing and a new job. She later became a mentor in the program, helping other women veterans navigate their own journeys. Maria's story inspired Barron to launch a new initiative within Pathways Forward focused specifically on women veterans, who often faced unique challenges, including a lack of gender-specific resources and higher rates of domestic violence. The initiative provided tailored support, from childcare services to counseling for survivors of trauma. It quickly became one of the most impactful parts of the organization. Meanwhile, Jacob continued to be a central figure in the movement. His charisma and authenticity made him a natural leader, and he often traveled with Barron to speak at events and meet with veterans. The bond between the two deepened as they worked side by side, united by a shared vision. Jacob often joked that he had found a second family in Barron, and Barron felt the same. As the years passed, Pathways Forward became a model for other organizations tackling homelessness and reintegration. Universities studied its methods, and international groups sought to replicate its success. Barron, still remarkably young, found himself in the unlikely role of a global advocate for veterans' rights. Despite the accolades and recognition, Barron remained humble. He often deflected praise, saying, "This was never about starting something big. It was about helping one person. The rest just happened." And yet, what had just happened was nothing short of extraordinary. Pathways Forward had not only changed countless lives, but also shifted the national conversation about veterans and homelessness. Barron's quiet determination had sparked a movement, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in unimaginable ways. As Pathways Forward matured, its influence extended beyond veterans alone, reaching into the broader issue of systemic poverty. While its mission remained focused on those who served, the organization's methods inspired other groups tackling homelessness and inequality. Cities began incorporating elements of Pathways Forward into their municipal plans, creating new public-private partnerships to address housing shortages and employment gaps. These ripple effects brought unexpected allies into the fold: educators, social workers, and even tech companies seeking to leverage innovation for social good. One such collaboration came when a group of software engineers approached Pathways Forward with a proposal to develop an app tailored for homeless veterans. The app, which Barron personally helped design, streamlined access to local resources, such as shelters, medical clinics, job fairs, and mentorship programs. It included features like real-time updates on available beds in shelters and a secure platform for veterans to communicate with counselors. Named Veteran Connect, the app quickly became a vital tool in the fight against homelessness, empowering individuals to navigate their options with dignity and independence. Barron's role in the app's development highlighted another aspect of his work: his ability to bridge generational divides. He understood technology in a way older advocates sometimes didn't, and he used this to create tools that resonated with younger veterans, many of whom felt alienated by traditional systems. At the same time, he had a deep respect for the wisdom of older veterans, frequently consulting them for advice and insights. This dual perspective allowed Pathways Forward to serve a wide range of needs, uniting generations in their shared struggles and triumphs. One of the app's earliest success stories came from a veteran named Marcus, a former Marine who had been living in his car for months. Through Veteran Connect, Marcus located a nearby shelter, connected with a counselor, and eventually secured a job that allowed him to move into permanent housing. His story became a symbol of what technology, when paired with empathy, could achieve. Beyond technology, Barron's efforts delved into another often overlooked area: the families of veterans. Recognizing that the challenges of homelessness and PTSD didn't exist in isolation, Pathways Forward launched a new initiative called Stronger Together. This program provided support to spouses, children, and extended families, offering everything from family counseling to scholarships for children of veterans. Barron often spoke about how families were the backbone of reintegration, emphasizing that their well-being was crucial to a veteran's success. One particularly moving moment occurred at a community event hosted by the Stronger Together initiative. A young girl named Sophie, whose father had recently transitioned from homelessness with Pathways Forward's help, presented Barron with a drawing. It showed her family in front of a house, with the words "Thank you" written in colorful letters. Barron was visibly moved, keeping the drawing as a reminder of the lives touched by the program. In the midst of all this growth, Barron never lost sight of the individual connections that had sparked the movement. He continued to visit shelters and transitional housing centers, sometimes unannounced, to sit and talk with veterans. It was in these quiet moments, listening, learning, and offering support, that he found his greatest sense of purpose. These conversations reinforced his belief that solutions to systemic problems always started with understanding the human stories at their core. By the time Pathways Forward celebrated its 5th anniversary, it had directly assisted tens of thousands of veterans and inspired countless others to take action in their own communities. The anniversary event, held in Washington, D.C., was not a celebration of the organization itself, but of the people who made it possible. Veterans like Jacob, Maria, Marcus, and countless others shared their stories on stage, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Barron, standing quietly in the background for much of the evening, was eventually called to the stage. When he addressed the crowd, his words were simple but profound. This isn't about one person or one organization. It's about what happens when we choose to care, when we choose to act. Together, we can change lives, and in doing so, we change the world. That night, as the audience erupted into applause, Barron felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the recognition, but for the journey. From a cold winter afternoon on a Washington street to a movement that spanned the nation, it had all started with a single decision to stop and listen. And while the work was far from over, Barron knew that what they had built together was a foundation strong enough to last for generations. As the evening of Pathways Forward's 5th anniversary drew to a close, Barron quietly stepped outside to reflect. The air was cool and crisp, reminding him of the day he first met Jacob. It was hard to believe how much had changed since then, not just for Jacob, but for himself. He had grown into a leader, not by choice but by necessity, propelled by a desire to do something meaningful in a world often mired in indifference. Behind him, the sound of laughter and applause echoed from the hall where veterans and their families were celebrating a brighter future. Each laugh, each shared embrace, was a reminder of what had been achieved, lives rebuilt, hope restored, and a sense of belonging rekindled for so many who had felt forgotten. Barron's thoughts turned to the future. He knew the work would never be finished. There would always be someone else in need of a second chance, another story waiting to unfold. But that was the beauty of the journey, the understanding that small acts of kindness could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. Smiling to himself, Barron resolved to keep walking that path, one step at a time, wherever it might lead. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Barron Trump helping a homeless veteran? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.